Hey everyone, Ray here. Right, it's time of the year that we put all major flagships from every brand of this generation together for an ultimate camera comparison. Here we have the Sony Xperia 1 Mark VIII, the latest Galaxy and the iPhone, which we had a dedicated camera comparison feature recently. Now, this time around, we'll also be having the Vivo X300 Ultra, the Oppo Find X9 Ultra, Xiaomi 17 Ultra, and the Honor Magic 8 Pro. Now, to be as fair as possible in this comparison, we'll not only be looking into ultra long-range zoom, which naturally will be part of this video, zooming all the way from here to there. Instead, it will be an all-round test from daytime, low light, natural landscape, city landscape, portrait, and everything in between along the journey. Who's got the best color reproduction, color accuracy, light contrast, and texture rendering? We'll also be looking into that as well. With that said, we'll be using a proper full-frame camera as a reference this time around. The point is, I should be able to capture as close as possible to how it actually looked like in real life in every scene we're going to compare today. Without further ado, the design and build quality. Right here on the front, I must say we're looking at really similar design choices here across the board, except for two. Take the Honor as an example, we're still getting a quad curve display on this particular device, and here on the Sony Xperia 1 Mark VIII, they're sticking with this slightly smaller 6.5 inches display. In return, we're holding a narrower phone and a lighter phone as well. It's measured at only about 74mm wide, and it weighs only about 200 grams, compared to the Ultra standard about 78mm wide and 230 grams in weight. We're having a smaller camera bump as well, and the microSD card slot is here that supports card up to 2 TB, though it's definitely a modern phone, it's got eSIM support. While here, the 2-steps camera shutter button is still here, and it behaves more like a real camera. Now, the 3.5mm headphone jack is also here, backed with Sony's DSEE Ultimate upscaling technology. Now, the real difference is here, we're still getting a top and bottom bezel here on the Sony. The good thing about this design is we're getting a dual front-facing speaker setup, and the display is completely flat and there's no any sort of notch or cutout. On the contrary, here on the Samsung, they're definitely leading the race when it comes to display technology. Take the privacy display as an example. The good thing about this is you can always toggle that on for only a portion of the display, while keeping the rest of the display sharp and clear. The anti-reflective coating on this particular display is also the absolute best on the market right now. It certainly makes the phone more enjoyable to use from day to day. And last but not least, we're having a humongous, gigantic camera array across the Oppo, Vivo, Xiaomi and Honor. Right, here it comes to the biggest highlight of this video, the cameras. Now, I'm not holding all 7 of them in hand, but here we have the quad camera setup here on the Galaxy. Still, we're having a 200MP main camera, 50MP ultra-wide lens, and a 50MP 5x telephoto camera. Now, the Oppo Find X9 Ultra is actually the only other phone here that has got 4 cameras. We're looking at a 50MP ultra-wide camera, a 200MP main camera, and a 200MP telephoto camera that is looking through a 70mm lens. The extra miles here, the 10x optical zoom lens that is based on a 50MP camera sensor. Here on the Vivo X300 Ultra, we are actually having an ultra-wide lens that is based on a 50MP 1/1.28-inch sensor. We've got the same 200MP 1/1.4-inch sensor for the 85mm telephoto lens, but here another 200MP sensor for the main camera that is based on a 1/1.12-inch sensor. Now, the Xiaomi, we don't have a fancy 200MP sensor for the main camera, but instead we have low-field technology here for the widest possible dynamic range for extreme situations like this, and the same 200MP 1/1.4-inch sensor for the telephoto lens. Now, the Sony Xperia 1 Mark VIII, they finally massively upgraded their telephoto camera to a whopping 1/1.56-inch sensor, looking through a 70mm prime lens this time around. So the quality of the optics here is absolutely brilliant. We'll be looking into it in a moment. Now, the ultra-wide lens here is actually exceptional as well. That is based also on a 1/1.56-inch sensor, and we've got a 50MP main camera here. So they've actually got something called dual layer transistor technology here. It's capturing light actually closer to a 1-inch sensor here. Now, how do they actually compare to each other in day-to-day photography? In a moment, I'll be standing between the phone and the highlight area Xperia, which is dominated by the bright red color casted by the bridge. Right, as you can see here, the large 1/1.56-inch sensor on the telephoto camera on the Sony truly pays off. It delivers a much brighter and more saturated, cleaner photo in general. Congratulations, it's now actually comparable to any other camera-focused flagships on the market. It's bright and clean, saturated, though with natural colors and light rendering. In the meantime, Vivo's being Vivo here, portrait skin tones usually going to be brighter and elevated. Meanwhile, it's interesting to see Xiaomi is giving a warmer white balance, almost leaning towards the golden yellow vibe. While speaking of colors, we definitely cannot skip the Zeiss's natural color tone here on the Vivo X300 Ultra, alongside with all those film simulations. Right, as you can see here, by default, colors look sharp and shadows look bright. While swapping the color profiles to Zeiss Natural, colors will now look literally more natural, though the shadows still looks bright. Now, similar story here on the Xiaomi. Not only have you got the carousel of Leica branded filters, what actually captured my attention is here. Similar to the Vivo, by default it will be shooting on the Leica Vibrant profile, which will give more saturated colors and brighter shadows. Now, the Leica Authentic profile actually behaves more like a real camera, the highlights bright and the shadows dark, much more like what you've got here on the Sony by default. So, which phone's taking the best photos? Apparently, that question's getting even harder to answer in just one simple sentence. As you've also got here on the Oppo, again, what truly matters is here the master mode. By default, the shadows looks much brighter, while the highlights are much more suppressed. Now, the master mode gives photos that look much more cinematic and just that extra more professional looking. Alright, just to keep it a fair comparison, here we've got all those photographic styles here on the iPhone, with the color wheel here for you to slightly adjust the contrast and the vibrancy of that look. The selection of color profiles and film simulation filters also not a concern here on the Honor Measure 8 Pro. Right, the Galaxy, or the default color filters, and we can actually create our own color filters here using photos shot on other devices previously. What about if you're looking for a phone that truly behaves more like a professional camera? The Sony's got you covered. Here, they actually let us to switch on and off computational photography. Who are you referring to here? And between HDR on and off, there's an extra dynamic range optimizer, which behaves more like their alpha cameras. Now, the pretty well-known eye-tracking focus on Sony cameras also here on their smartphone. It actually works for both still photos capturing and video recording. The tracking focus system here on the One Mark 8 actually works one of the best, if not the absolute best. Now, I've actually tried taking a photo of a butterfly that was flying in mid-air. The result totally surprised me. Now, the butterfly is clearly in focus, sharp and bright, while the background, thanks to the large sensor, is actually slightly blurred. Bravo, Sony. And if you're really into color filters, they've got you covered as well, a wide selection of color filters here. You can actually slightly tweak and adjust that as well. Now, for the sake of comparing photos out of the box, we'll not be using color filters of any sort in this video entirely. With that said, the first round of today's test, I'll be capturing the soft toy here. It might look a bit casual, but believe me, the difference across the board will actually be greater than what you might have been expecting. Now, I've actually taken a few steps back, accommodating the nearest focus distance on the iPhone, the telephoto camera there. Right, we'll be comparing the telephoto camera this time around. Now, all the photos here were shot in auto mode. We've got a warmer white balance on the Oppo and the Honor this time around. Color reproduction on this particular scene is actually pretty good on the iPhone and the Galaxy. Though believe it or not, the Sony Xperia 1 Mark 8 is delivering colors that are so close to their proper professional camera, this particular one. Well, as you can clearly see here, Vivo and Xiaomi is definitely boosting color saturation and the brightness of the image overall. Now, that was a photo shot in auto mode, vivid and vibrant mode, just keep that in mind. Alright, the upcoming one we'll be looking at the bright orange flower here. In my opinion, it's actually quite a good test to reveal if the manufacturer is adding excessive color saturation to the photos. Right, as you can clearly tell once again, the Vivo and the Xiaomi is adding excessive color saturation to the photos. And once again, the Sony 1 Mark 8 is delivering colors that are so close to their proper professional camera. And indeed, that's only how it would look like if you're shooting in full auto on the Vivo and the Xiaomi. Once you've switched to Zeiss Natural and Leica Authentic, it would be so much better, especially here on the Xiaomi. Color reproduction and color accuracy is actually good. And you can still see the slight boost in color saturation here on the Vivo. Don't get me wrong, it can actually be a good thing depending on personal preference for sure. Now the iPhone, the Galaxy and the Honor are doing a pretty good job here as well, with the Galaxy being on the edge of being oversaturated, while here on the Oppo, by default colors tend to be more vibrant as you would have been expected. Now the interesting bit here is the master mode here on the Oppo not only dials back color saturation, it actually changes how it sees and renders colors as well. Once again, it can be both good and bad depending on if you would want more cinematic and moody colors or if you would prefer more true to life and natural colors. In that case, Sony's clearly absolutely nailed it this time around. As we can see here as well, I've actually noticed two areas that are worth mentioning here on the Sony, the telephoto camera 70mm lens here. One, color reproduction is almost like 98% the same as the colors coming out of the proper professional camera from Sony their own. And two, the level of details at its optical range is actually top-notch. While the bokeh on the background, that's really smooth. Now that's not a full-frame camera, we'll be getting even more shallow depth of field on a sensor that's much larger for sure. So I really appreciate the quality of the optics here on a phone. Now we're getting very similar colors on the Xiaomi, surprise! And once again, the iPhone and the Galaxy is actually doing pretty well when it comes to color reproduction, while the master mode on the Oppo and the natural color profile on the Honor actually saved them from being oversaturated. However, if we're comparing them to the Sony once again and the Xiaomi, we're actually getting much better micro contrast here. So surprisingly, the Sony I-VIII actually did the best in this particular scene. It's bright, sharp and dynamic, accurate as well. Right, as we're comparing photos coming out of 8 different devices this time around, we're spending more time on each photos here than we normally would. In short, under broad daylight, by default, the iPhone, the Galaxy, Honor, Vivo and Oppo all decided to lift up the brightness of the shadows. The photos are definitely going to be brighter to look at and seems to be more balanced, while the Sony's actually delivering photos that are more like coming out of a professional camera. You can see the great contrast between the highlights and the shadows and the micro contrast as well. The Xiaomi is actually doing really close in this particular area, which I'm totally not surprised considering their partnership with Leica. Moving on to the next location, which in my opinion would be really challenging for any smartphone to master, as we're pointing the cameras directly towards the highlights area here from the shadows in such a high contrasty scene. Now, the last time I've came here was actually quite a few years ago when the technology wasn't quite there yet. Surprise, every single one of them actually nailed it this time around. We're getting well exposed, bright and sharp photos out of all of them. The only difference you've got here is probably how they render the shadows and the highlights once again. As you can see, once again the Sony phone's delivering a photo that is almost like coming out of their professional camera. The Xiaomi is doing really close in that particular area, while the Vivo is giving a more contrasty and sharper photo that is more social media ready if you're into that. While here on the ultra-wide, we're actually getting slightly wider dynamic range here on the Sony and the Vivo thanks to the larger sensor. The shadows also look slightly darker and softer here on the iPhone, and it's interesting to see the Honor's actually boosting contrast here as well. And last but definitely not least here for this scene on the main camera, once again we're getting greater contrast between the highlights and the shadows area across the Sony and the Xiaomi, resulting in a more professional looking photo, while we'll be definitely getting a more dramatic look across the Vivo, the Oppo and the Honor. Though I must say the difference here is not as huge as I've expected. Right, just before it's turning into a terrible end of this video, the difference across the board in the upcoming one would be huge. Now, traditionally, if we're pointing the Sony towards a high contrast, low light scene like this, it would be a terrible idea to say the least. Once again, congratulations Sony, they've finally nailed it. HDR is definitely here. This time around, the level of details here on the highlights area, that's actually identical to what we've got here on the Vivo, which is pretty well known for its effective HDR effect. While here, the shadows and the contrast area, that absolutely captured my attention. How is it even possible? Great thumbs up for Sony. The Sony Xperia is now actually capturing colors and contrast really similar to their professional camera, from scenes to scenes. Now, for low-light scenes like this, a normal, modern smartphone will definitely try so hard to lift up the brightness of the shadows area, delivering a brighter photo in general, which appears to be the case here across the board except the Sony. From here, it's fair to say the Sony Xperia is behaving more like a professional camera. Don't get me wrong, it's not the only criteria for being a great smartphone. It's a phone, after all. Being easy to use is really important as well. Though in my opinion, I must say Sony might be actually telling us it can actually be both easy to use and professional. Once again, we are actually getting one of the best low-light performance here on the telephoto camera on the Sony this time around. As you can see here, there's essentially no digital noise at all on the Sony. Multi-frame processing and digital noise removal is definitely there. Now, I actually prefer the low-light night scene effect here on the Sony, while I do actually prefer the bright red color here on the Vivo and the Xiaomi. It might be artificial from a technical point of view, so I reckon if I truly survey my friends, most of them might actually end up picking the one from either the Vivo or the Xiaomi. Now, we're actually getting very similar results here across the Oppo and the Honor. Colors are more saturated and exaggerated. Same thing here on the iPhone and even the Galaxy. It would be safe to say the one shot on the Sony is definitely pure. It's more like you're going to like it or you're going to like the others. Right, speaking of pure and accurate, here's what I've found shooting on the ultra-wide camera this time around. I have to say, how is it even possible considering some phones out there can't even synchronize the colors across different lenses on the same phone? While here on the Sony Xperia, that actually captures colors and contrast so close to their own professional camera. On the contrary, for sure the photos shot on the Vivo and the Xiaomi could be more engaging and dramatic. They're certainly brighter and more saturated. Once again, personal preference here. However, on the other side of the story, the iPhone actually gave a photo with boosted shadows and a slightly greenish tint to it, while we've got warmer tones and increased saturation here on the Oppo, cooler tone and a reddish tint here on the Galaxy, and a warmer tone with a greenish tint here on the Honor. Right, just a few more seconds taking a look at the camera reference here, the Sony VIII, Vivo X300 Ultra and the Xiaomi 17 Ultra. Alright, just one more shot on the ultra-wide camera just to prove whatever we've found is actually correct. Now, as we can see here, the Vivo and the Sony actually performs really similarly when it comes to the ultra-wide camera and shooting in low light, and is reasonable as we're having a 1/1.28-inch sensor here on the Vivo and a 1/1.56-inch sensor on the Sony. Noise control and the level of details on another level here if we're comparing that to the Xiaomi. Now, the iPhone's actually delivering a slightly underexposed photo as well, with more digital noise. In the meantime, sharpening effect is more pronounced here on the Honor, and we can actually see some digital noise there as well. It's better on the Galaxy, and it's even better on the Oppo, considering we're having a 1/1.95-inch sensor here on the Oppo, compared to 1/2 point something on the iPhone and the Galaxy. Time for the main camera as well, we're looking at much closer performance across the board here. Now, the Xiaomi technically has an edge here, featuring a 1-inch low-vic sensor, while here on the Vivo and the Oppo, we're having a 200 megapixels 1/1.12-inch sensor, very close to 1 inch here. Now, the Sony is having a slightly smaller 1/1.35-inch sensor on paper, though the dual layer transistor technology apparently is helping a lot here. Noise control and dynamic range in day-to-day photography across all the 7 phones appears to be really close. Now, the Xiaomi could be doing better in some extreme situations, like when you're watching a fireworks show, mostly due to the low-vic technology there. Right, this one's actually really interesting as well. Now we're shooting on the telephoto camera. Here on the Galaxy, the iPhone and the Honor, they all tend to boost the brightness of the shadows, resulting in photos that are perceived to be brighter. While here on the Oppo, the Vivo and the Xiaomi, they're producing more cinematic photos, especially the Xiaomi here. Now the Sony, the camera wasn't with me that particular day, though judging from the contrast and the micro contrast here on the highlights, I believe if I did took the photo with the professional camera here, it would look really similar to what we've got here on the Xperia. So far, we've got photo comparisons from daytime all the way to low light. Now, portrait photography. It's quite obvious that we've got really advanced beauty mode here on the Honor, Vivo, Oppo and Xiaomi. So this time around, we'll actually be looking into skin tone rendering and color reproduction once again. In this case, we'll be comparing photos shot without any sort of skin effect. Including here, the Sony, they've actually got a soft skin effect here hidden inside the settings menu. Right, portrait mode used to be a weaker area on a Sony phone. Now, this time around, it's both good news and not so great news. The good side of the story first, the Sony is now able to separate the main subject from the background pretty accurately, and the skin tone's really similar to their professional camera as well. And as you can also see here, the phone's now even able to capture the slight micro contrast from the left side of the face to the right. Now, no matter which mode you're shooting with on the Vivo and the Xiaomi, they do tend to balance out and smoothen out the micro contrast there on the skin tone. Now swapping to the Oppo and the Galaxy, as well as the iPhone and the Honor, we're having the familiar warmer skin tone here on the iPhone, warm skin tone and higher saturation here on the Oppo, a cooler white balance here and skin tone here on the Galaxy, and natural skin tone here on the Honor, but color saturation appears to be elevated. Now look, the not so great news here on the Sony. Don't get me wrong, edge detection and background separation is actually pretty great here on the Sony this time around. So if you look there close enough, the Vivo and the Xiaomi is like capturing each strand of my hair. Or is it rendered? Now we've got slightly different texture and details across the Vivo, Xiaomi and the camera reference. Are they really there or generated with a little bit of help from the algorithm? Does it even matter? What do you think? Now, in the upcoming one, I'll be standing further away from the phone and shooting on the main camera. We're getting accurate background separation across all devices we're testing today, while here we've got elevated skin tone across the Honor, Xiaomi, Vivo and the Oppo. Now we're having more natural color tones here across the Sony, the Galaxy and the iPhone, and we're having really accurate edge detection here even on the Sony this time around. Now swapping to the 5x telephoto lens here on the Galaxy, the image quality here is so much better compared to if we're shooting with the 3x 10 megapixels one. The major highlight here is, once again, the Sony Xperia is able to capture the micro contrast on the skin tone and from the left side to the right side on the skin tone. Now the Xiaomi is actually taking a pretty natural photo here, using Leica portrait and all the beauty mode effect switched off, while the Vivo tends to boost color saturation and brightens up the skin tone even when I was using the Zeiss natural mode here. Once again, it would be totally depending on personal preference, as we've got a more natural photo here across the Sony, iPhone and the Galaxy. The one here on the Sony is actually pretty great, while here we're getting a more dramatic photo across the Xiaomi and the Oppo. The one shot on the Vivo's brighter and more balanced, though the one here shot on the Honor, HDR effect seems to be slightly on the more aggressive side. Alright, ultra long range zoom. Now here on the Sony, we've actually got a totally different approach here. Now the maximum zoom, as you can see here, is 17.5x, or shall I say digital crop. As I've actually tried taking a photo using 17.5x zoom, the photo turns out to be read as 5.8x 140mm. Now in my opinion, Sony might be trying to be as authentic as possible here. It's true, beyond 5.8x, everything you're seeing here is digital crop. Is it a good thing or a bad thing? Now, as you can see here, the Galaxy simply takes a sharper photo at long-range zoom, and here's a photo shot at 10x. Now, we have all those fancy 200 megapixels sensor on the telephoto camera here across the Xiaomi and the Vivo, and we're actually shooting on the native 10x optical focal length here on the Oppo. It's both fascinating to see how phones evolve over the years, though I do like Samsung as a brand, but the telephoto camera there is starting to fall slightly behind. We'll see what happens on the next S27 Ultra. One more shot at 10x, the photo's actually pretty usable here on the Sony. Well, here we may take a look at here if we're comparing the Galaxy to the rest of the competition, the Xiaomi, the Vivo and the Oppo. At 10x, the difference here is actually not that pronounced, considering 10x is still within the optical range on the Galaxy. Now, at 20x, the difference here is actually not as huge as I've anticipated. I do see the over-sharpening effect here on the Galaxy, while the AI is definitely even more aggressive here across the Honor, the Xiaomi and the Vivo. Now, the Vivo is actually doing a really great job here considering the Oppo's got a 10x optical zoom lens. The difference between these two, I would say, is more like negligible. Slightly more natural here on the Oppo while being sharp, you've got the idea. Alright, all in all, each of them indeed has their own strength to be as fair as possible. Now, if you're really into ultra long-range zoom photography, 10x, 20x, 50x, the Oppo Find X9 Ultra is a really great phone here. Under broad daylight, details are sharp and texture are natural even when you're shooting at 20x. There's one thing that you might want to keep in mind, however. The 10x lens here appears to be designed for daytime photography. During the night, especially in scenes like these, 10x photos and beyond might actually be depending on the AI zoom using the 3x telephoto lens. Now the Vivo, it's a really all-round camera phone. Easy to use, ready for sharing portrait photos, bright and sharp every time. Now, I personally do not have a preference here, it's totally based on your choice, but here's a photo shot at 50x, it's bright and sharp as always. The fact that Vivo's algorithms turning every photo and every scene into a usable, social media ready photo, from that perspective is actually worth some applause in my opinion. And if you're into pro videography, you've got lock video here and a really professional video mode here on the Vivo. Now, to be fair, when it comes to lock video recording, the iPhone started all of it, and the Galaxy, the Vivo, the Xiaomi, the Oppo, and the Honor all got that covered. Now, the Xiaomi, in my opinion, is more like a phone built for photography enthusiasts. It can actually be a great balance between the Sony and the Vivo and the Oppo. The algorithms and the AI is definitely there if you prefer the social media ready effect, and zoom there is great. Meanwhile, it's also got the light and the shadows, the contrast and dynamics of light rendered closer to the Sony Xperia and the professional camera. Now, the Sony Xperia 1 Mark 8 is an absolutely unique phone here. On one side, you've got tele-macro support just like the Vivo, the Xiaomi, and the Oppo. Well, if you pay enough of attention here, not only is the subject sharp and natural, the optical background blur effect here is really smooth. Now, the optical quality of the lens here is absolutely breathtaking. While here across the Honor, the Galaxy, and the iPhone, you'll be relying on the ultra-wide lens for super macro photography. It certainly gets the job done. Now here, the Sony Xperia, the focus system here is also really reliable. Just look at and compare how accurate and sensitive the focus system here actually is. Now, what truly makes the phone stand out, in my opinion, would be color reproduction and the accuracy of colors, the smooth gradation of colors as well. It's got the magenta color, bright red, bright yellow, bright orange, and green colors all sorted. Meanwhile, all the photos we're seeing today were shot in auto mode, so it's definitely an easy-to-use phone. While this particular one, we're actually using full auto. All the bokeh balls here you're seeing on the background is pure optical bokeh. Now, from scenes to scenes, we've also proven color accuracy and the contrast of light were perfectly rendered, just like their professional camera. While doing all that, on top of that, they've finally got low-light performance on the telephoto camera, the main sensor, and the ultra-wide camera, all great. If you would prefer a phone that behaves more like a professional camera and gives photo that looks like it's coming out of a professional camera, the lights and the shadows, the contrast and all the colors, the Sony is absolutely brilliant this year. Right, the downside here is ultra-long-range zoom and lock support for video recording. What you have got here is S-Cinetone for mobile, which lines up pretty well with their larger alpha cameras, and the AI auto-framing mode here for video. Now here, I was actually putting the phone horizontally on a tripod there. It records a video in 4K in landscape, like it should be. At the same time, it's giving a vertical 16:9 video with the auto-framing feature using Sony's eye tracking focus. It's like magic and it's really advanced. Now the Galaxy, the camera's dependable and is all-rounded, though the camera system here might not be what makes the phone stand out from the crowd this time around. Once again, the privacy display is definitely ahead, and all the Galaxy AI features are more polished here on the Galaxy One UI 8.5. Now, Google Gemini is actually available on literally all Android devices, even here on the Xperia XZ Premium, which was a 2017 phone. Alright, can you search on my email about my flight from Hong Kong to Rome? It was from a couple of months ago, and can you please include the flight number and departure date and time as well? Flight number, Swiss LX. Alright, can you summarize this as a text message and send it to TacoBB via WhatsApp? All that using voice command. Now, with the newly upgraded Siri AI, I believe they would be able to do similar stuff here on the iPhone as well. Now, I've actually upgraded my iPhone to iOS 27 developer preview here, though I'm still on the waiting list to try out the Siri AI. Now, I'm actually working on another video about battery drain test. There, I'll also be comparing the photo editing tools across each of the devices here. Right, so that's it for today. Hope you guys enjoyed watching it, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe to this channel, and see you all next time.